So for this class, we're going to work through this text, They Say. In this video, chapters 1, 2, and 3 will be covered. And this is about how and why to reference sources in your papers. So chapter 1, They Say, starting with what others are saying. Not long ago, we attended a talk at an academic conference where the speaker's central claim seemed to be that a certain sociologist, let's call him Dr. X, had done very good work in a number of areas of the discipline. The speaker proceeded to illustrate his thesis by referring extensively and in great detail to various books and articles by Dr. X, and by quoting long passages from them. The speaker was obviously both learned and impassioned, but as we listened to his talk, we found ourselves somewhat puzzled. The argument, which was that Dr. X's work was very important, was clear enough. But why did the speaker need to make it in the first place? Why was he making this argument? Did anyone dispute it or disagree with it? Were there commentators in the field who had argued against X's work or challenged its value? Was the speaker's interpretation of what X had done somehow novel or new or revolutionary? Since the speaker gave no hint of an answer to any of these questions, we could only wonder why he was going on and on about X. It was only after the speaker finished and took questions from the audience that we got a clue. In response to one questioner, he referred to several critics, or people who disagree, right? Who had vigorously questioned Dr. X's ideas and convinced many sociologists that Dr. X's work was unsound or not true. This story illustrates an important lesson. So here's the lesson we get from this story. That to give writing the most important thing of all, which is a point or a reason, a writer needs to indicate clearly not only what his or her thesis is, but also what larger conversation that thesis is responding to. Because our speaker failed to mention what others had said about Dr. X's work, he left his audience unsure about why he felt the need to say what he was saying. Perhaps the point was clear to other sociologists in the audience who were more familiar with the debates over Dr. X's work than we were, but even they, we bet, would have understood the speaker's point better if he'd sketched in some of the larger conversation his own claims were a part of and reminded the audience about what they say. This story also illustrates an important lesson about the order in which things are said. To keep an audience engaged, a writer needs to explain what he or she is responding to, either before offering that response or at least very early in the discussion. Delaying this explanation for more than 1 or 2 paragraphs in a very short essay, or in 3 or 4 paragraphs in a longer one, or more than 10 or so pages in a book-length text, reverses the natural order in which readers process material, and in which writers think and develop ideas. After all, it seems very unlikely that our conference speaker first developed his defense of Dr. X and only later came across Dr. X's critics. As someone knowledgeable in his field, the speaker surely encountered the criticisms first, and only then was compelled to respond and, as he saw it, set the record straight. Therefore, when it comes to constructing an argument, whether orally, like in a presentation, or in writing, we offer you the following advice. Remember that you are entering a conversation, and therefore need to start with what others are saying, as the title of this chapter recommends, and then introduce your own ideas as a response. Specifically, we suggest that you summarize what they say as soon as you can in your text, and remind readers of it at strategic points as your text unfolds. Though it's true that not all texts follow this practice, we think it's important for all writers to master it before they depart from it. And this is true whether or not you're writing an argumentative essay, right? So this is true also for any scientific article. You first start with the background research, with what they say, and then you introduce your own idea as part of that conversation. So let's go back to the text. This is not to say that you must start with a detailed list of everyone who has written on your subject before you offer your own ideas. Had our conference speaker gone to the opposite extreme and spent most of his talk summarizing Dr. X's critics with no hint of what he himself had to say, the audience probably would have had the same frustrated, "Why is he going on like this?" reaction. What we suggest then is that as soon as possible, you state your position on the one it's responding to together, and that you think of the two as a unit. It is generally best to summarize the idea you're responding to, or the ideas you're responding to, briefly at the start of your text, and to delay detailed elaboration until later. The point is to give your readers a quick preview of what is motivating your argument, not to drown them in the details right away. So starting with a summary of others' views may seem to contradict the common advice that writers should lead with their own thesis or claim. Although we agree that you shouldn't keep readers in suspense too long about your central argument, we also believe that you need to present that argument as part of some larger conversation, indicating something about the arguments of others that you are supporting, opposing, amending, complicating, or qualifying. One added benefit of summarizing others' views as soon as you can is that you let those others do some of the work of framing and clarifying the issue you're writing about. So the first sentence of an introduction paragraph isn't your thesis, right? It's background information. But the suggestion here is that background information should be the conversations so far in the research, what others have said about your topic. Let's go back to the text. Consider, for example, how George Orwell starts his famous essay, Politics and the English Language, with what others are saying. Let me just plug in my computer. It's running out of batteries. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So let's look at George Orwell's essay. It's the very beginning. He says, "Most people who bother with the matter at all would admit that the English language is in a bad way. That means in a bad condition. But it is generally assumed that we cannot by conscious action do anything about it. Our civilization is decadent, and our language, so the argument runs, must inevitably share in the general collapse." So the argument he talks about here is that the English language is deteriorating and there's nothing we can do about it. But it's not his own idea, it's somebody else's. And then he puts in his own argument. But the process is reversible, right? We can change the bad state of the English language. Modern English is full of bad habits, which can be avoided if one is willing to take the necessary trouble. So Orwell is basically saying, most people assume that we cannot do anything about the bad state of the English language, but I say we can. Of course, there are many other powerful ways to begin. Instead of opening with somebody else's views, you could start with an illustrative quotation, a revealing fact or statistic, or, as we do in this chapter, a relevant anecdote or story, like they did at the beginning of this chapter. If you choose one of these formats, however, be sure that it in some way illustrates or shows the view you're addressing or leads to you to that view directly, with a minimum of steps. In opening this chapter, for example, we devote the first paragraph to an anecdote about the conference speaker, and then move quickly at the start of the second paragraph to the misconception about writing, exemplified by the speaker. In the following opening from a 2004 opinion piece in the New York Times Book Review, Christina Naring also moves quickly from an anecdote, or story illustrating something she dislikes, to her own claim that book lovers think too highly of themselves. So she says, "I'm a reader," announced the yellow button. "How about you?" I looked at its bearer, a strapping young guy stalking my town's festival of books. "I'll bet you're a reader," he volunteered, as though we were two geniuses. Well met. "No," I replied, "absolutely not." I wanted to yell and fling my Barnes & Noble bag at his feet. Instead, I mumbled something apologetic and melted into the crowd. So this is a conflict she had where she met somebody that she didn't like. There's a new piety in the air, the self-congratulation of book lovers. So she's talking about a guy who loves himself because he reads books, who loves himself because he loves books, and then she criticizes it here. This is her argument. Naring's anecdote is really a kind of they say book lovers keep telling themselves how great they are, and then I say it's not so great. So here are some templates for introducing what they say, and you'll see these a lot in academic articles too, as well as argumentative essays. There are a lot of conventional or traditional ways to introduce what others are saying. Here are some standard templates that we would have recommended to our conference speaker. A number of sociologists have recently suggested that X's work has several fundamental problems. And then they would go on to say, however, it's not true, he's awesome. Here's another one. It has become common today to dismiss blank. However, that's not true. Or not appropriate. Another one. In their recent work, Y and Z have offered harsh critiques of blank for blank. However, their critiques are incorrect. There are also templates for introducing standard views. The following templates or formulas can help you make what we call the standard view move, in which you introduce a view that has become so widely accepted that by now it is essentially the conventional way of thinking about a topic. For instance, Americans have always believed that individual effort can triumph over circumstances. This is something that most people believe that maybe you disagree with. Conventional wisdom has it that common sense seems to dictate that. The standard way of thinking about topics X has it that. It is often that said that. My whole life I have heard it said that. You would think that, and most people assume that. These templates are popular because they provide a quick and efficient way to perform one of the most common moves that writers make, challenging widely accepted beliefs, placing them on the examining table, and analyzing their strengths and their weaknesses. Okay. All right. So we're going to go on to the next section. Here, keep what they say in view. We can't urge you too strongly to keep in mind what they say as you move through the rest of your text. After summarizing the ideas you are responding to at the outset, it's very important to continue to keep those ideas in view. Readers won't be able to follow your unfolding response, much less any complications you may offer, unless you keep reminding them what claims you are responding to. In other words, even when presenting your own claims, you should keep returning to the motivating, they say, the other people's ideas. The longer and more complicated your text, the greater the chance that readers will forget what ideas originally motivated it, no matter how clearly you lay them out at the beginning. At strategic moments throughout your text, we recommend that you include what we call return sentences. Here's an example. In conclusion then, as I suggested earlier, Defenders of the side that I don't agree with can't have it both ways. Their assertion that blank is contradicted by their claim that blank. This is true for any idea in your text. You always need to remind your reader what you've said before in order to make sure that they remember the main points in your article. Okay, so we're not going to do this exercise here. We're going on to this next chapter. And this is about summarizing. Her point is, if it is true, as we claim in this book, that to argue persuasively you need to be in a dialogue with others, then summarizing others' arguments is central to your arsenal. Arsenal means like your group of weapons of basic moves. Because writers who make strong claims need to map their claims relative to those of other people, it is important to know how to summarize effectively what those other people say. And we're using the word summarizing here to refer to any information from others that you present in your own words, including that which you paraphrase. So by here he's talking about summarizing, but he's including paraphrase in this. We usually think of summarizing as something shorter, paraphrasing as something about the same length as the original text. Many readers shy away or don't want to summarize. So many writers shy away from summarizing. Why? Perhaps because they don't want to take the trouble to go back to the text in question and wrestle or struggle with what it says. Or maybe because they fear that devoting too much time to other people's ideas will take away from their own. But in a good paper, right, we always summarize other people's ideas first. So if you remember this article that we read in class, you can see that her argument, which is that there are good things about playing video games, is preceded by several paragraphs, or one paragraph, a very long paragraph, about the negative aspects of video games. What research has been done on the negative effects of video games, which is actually the side that she's somewhat disagreeing with. And she has a lot of summaries and paraphrases here with correct citation. So learning how to summarize is really important if you want to put your argument in a context. And then there are those at the opposite extreme who do nothing but summarize. And here I'm back at the text. Lacking confidence, perhaps, in their own ideas, these writers so overload their text with summaries of others' ideas that their own voice gets lost. And since these summaries are not animated by the writer's own interests, they often read like mere lists of things that X or Y says, with no clear focus. So here in this essay, okay, she begins with a lot of summaries, but she does have her own argument here. As a general rule, a good summary requires balancing what the original author is saying and the writer's own focus. Generally speaking, a summary must at once be true to what the original author says while also emphasizing those aspects of what the author says that interest you, the writer. All right, so what is he saying here? He's saying that when you summarize, or paraphrase, don't just say exactly what the original text says. You need to pick and choose the information that is relevant to your topic and phrase it in a way that it fits in your text and makes logical sense. That's why it's so useful to paraphrase or summarize in your own words instead of quoting the exact words. All right, now I'm back here reading. Striking this delicate balance can be tricky since it means facing two ways at once, both outward toward the author being summarized and inward toward yourself. Ultimately, it means being respectful of others, but at the same time, simultaneously, structuring how you summarize them in light of your own text's central claim. Okay, so on the one hand, put yourself in their shoes. To write a really good summary, you must be able to suspend your own beliefs. That means stop thinking about what you believe for a time and put yourself in the shoes of someone else. This means playing what the writing theorist Peter Elbow calls the believing game, in which you try to inhabit or live in the worldview of those whose conversation you are joining and whom you are perhaps even disagreeing with, and try to see their argument from their perspective. This ability to temporarily suspend one's own convictions is a hallmark of good actors who must convincingly become characters whom in real life they may detest or hate. For instance, if you have to play the villain in a movie, right, you have to pretend that you're a horrible, horrible person. You have to do the same thing if you're a writer. You have to pretend that you are really believing things that you don't actually believe. I'm reading again. Here he says, as a writer, when you play the believing game, readers should not be able to tell whether you agree or disagree with the ideas you are summarizing. So that's called being objective, right? If, as a writer, you cannot or will not suspend your own beliefs in this way, you are likely to produce summaries that are so obviously biased, right? That's an important word. If you don't know it, look it up. Or subjective, that they undermine your credibility with readers. Consider the following summary. So this guy is talking about David Zinczenko's article, and he says, David Zinczenko's article, Don't Blame the Eater, is nothing more than an angry rant in which he accuses the fast food companies of an evil conspiracy to make people fat. I disagree, because these companies have to make money. If you review what Zinczenko actually says, and it's actually in this book and you guys are going to read it, you should immediately see that this summary amounts to an unfair distortion. It changes what he's really trying to say. While Zinczenko does argue that practices of the fast food industry have the effect of making people fat, his tone is never angry, and he never goes so far as to suggest that the fast food industry conspires to make people fat with deliberately evil intent. Another telltale sign of this writer's failure to give Zinczenko a fair hearing is the hasty way he abandons the summary after only one sentence and rushes on to his own response. So eager is this writer to disagree that he has not only caricatured what Zinczenko said, but he also gives the article a hasty, superficial reading. So he doesn't spend enough time on what the article says. He doesn't summarize enough here. Granted, there are many writing situations in which, because of matters of proportion, a 1 or 2 sentence summary is precisely what you want. So sometimes 1 or 2 sentences is enough for a summary. Indeed, as writing professor Karen Lunsford, whose own research focuses on argument theory, points out, it is standard in the natural and social sciences to summarize the work of others quickly, in one pithy sentence or phrase. Pithy means like short, concise, as in the following example. Several studies, crackle, pop, and snap. Okay, so these are 3 different studies that she's talking about all in one sentence, suggest that these policies are harmless. Moreover, other studies, another 3 studies, argue that they even have benefits. This isn't actually a real example, but it shows you how you can summarize 3 entire papers in just a couple words, basically. But if your assignment is to respond in writing to a single author like Zinczenko, you will need to tell your readers enough about his or her arguments so that they can assess its merits on their own independent of you. This is especially important if you're writing a report on an essay, a response essay. Okay. When a writer fails to provide enough summary or to engage in a rigorous or serious enough summary, he or she often falls prey to what we call the closest cliche syndrome, in which what gets summarized is not the view the author in question has actually expressed, but a familiar cliche that the writer mistakes for the author's views, sometimes because the writer believes it and mistakenly assumes the author must too. So, for example, Martin Luther King Jr.'s passionate defense of civil disobedience in letter from Brigham in jail might be summarized not as the defense of political protest that it actually is, but as a plea for everyone to just get along. Similarly, Zinczenko's critique of the fast food industry might be summarized as a call for overweight people to take responsibility for their weight, but it's actually much more complicated than that. Whenever you enter into a conversation with others in your writing, then, it is extremely important that you go back to what others have said and that you study it very closely and that you not confuse it with something you already believe. A writer who fails to do this ends up essentially conversing with imaginary others who are really only the products of his or her own biases and preconceptions. Okay, so we learned from here that we need to pay close attention to what other people have said and represent it appropriately and give enough real detail instead of a false summary. But we could go too far with that and include too many details. So, that don't have to do with what we're trying to say or our own topic. Okay, so on the other hand, know where you are going. Know what your point is. Know why you're using this quote. What is the purpose of the quote? What is the purpose of the paraphrase or the summary? Even as writing an effective summary requires you to temporarily adopt the worldview of another, it does not mean ignoring your own view altogether. Paradoxically, at the same time that summarizing another text requires you to represent fairly what it says, it also requires that your own response exert a quiet influence on the paraphrase. A good summary, in other words, has a focus or spin that allows the summary to fit in with your own agenda while still being true to the text you are summarizing. Thus, if you are writing in response to the essay by Zinczenko, which you will at least read the essay, you should be able to see that an essay on the fast food industry in general will call for a very different summary than will an essay on parenting, corporate regulation, or warning labels. If you want your essay to encompass all three topics, you'll need to subordinate these three issues to one of Zinczenko's general claims and then make sure this general claim directly sets up your own argument. So, for example, let's suppose you want to argue that it is parents, not fast food companies, who are to blame for children's obesity. To set up this argument, you will probably want to compose a summary that highlights what Zinczenko says about the fast food industry and parents. So not include all the details from this essay, but the ones that are relevant to the topic of parents. Consider this sample. In his article, Don't Blame the Eater, David Zinczenko blames the fast food industry for fueling today's so-called obesity epidemic, not only by failing to provide adequate warning labels on its high-calorie foods, but also by filling the nutritional void in children's lives left by their overtaxed working parents. Okay, so this gives really good, specific information from the essay. With many parents working long hours and unable to supervise what their children eat, Zinczenko claims, children today are easily victimized by low-cost, calorie-laden foods that the fast food chains are all too eager to supply. When he was a young boy, for instance, and his single mother was away at work, he ate at Taco Bell, McDonald's, and other chains on a regular basis and ended up overweight. Makes me hungry. You guys don't know Taco Bell probably, but if you ever go to the US, you should definitely eat at Taco Bell. It's like fast food Mexican. Okay, and McDonald's is awesome. Zinczenko's hope is that with the new spate of lawsuits against the food industry, other children with working parents will have healthier choices available to them, and that they will not, like him, become obese. This is all just a summary of Zinchenko, but it focuses on parents, you'll see. Now here comes the thesis. In my view, however, it is the parents and not the food chains who are responsible for their children's obesity. While it is true that many of today's parents work long hours, there are still several things that parents can do to guarantee that their children eat healthy foods. The summary in the first paragraph succeeds because it points in two directions at once, both towards Zinchenko's own text and toward the second paragraph, where the writer begins to establish her own argument. The opening sentences give a sense of Zinchenko's general argument that the fast food chains are to blame for obesity, but it also includes his two main supporting claims about warning labels and parents. Including both his two main supporting claims about warning labels and parents, but it ends with an emphasis on the writer's main concern, which is parental responsibility. In this way, the summary does justice to Zinchenko's argument by including the necessary details, while also setting up an ensuing critique. So it has kind of a transition. This advice to summarize authors in light of your own arguments may seem painfully obvious. Why am I saying this? But writers often summarize a given author on one issue, even though their text actually focuses on a completely different issue. To avoid this problem, you need to make sure that your they say and I say are well matched. In fact, aligning what they say with what you say is a good thing to work on when revising what you've written. Okay, so this is true not even when you're disagreeing with somebody's words. Maybe you're using them as evidence to support what you're saying. If it's evidence, you also need to make sure that you're only including the information that really is relevant to your topic. Otherwise, it really serves some purpose in your paper. Otherwise, your reader is going to be like, why are they telling me this? I don't need to know this. So often writers who summarize without regard to their own interests fall prey to what we might call list summaries. Summaries that simply inventory the original author's various points but fail to focus these points around any larger overall claim. You don't want to just list summaries and paraphrases in quotes. They need to fit properly in your paper. If you've ever heard a talk in which the points were connected only by words like and then, also, and in addition, you know how such lists can put listeners to sleep, as shown in Figure 3. That's funny, he's saying, as shown in Figure 3, as if he's showing a graph, but it's just a cartoon. He's funny, this author's funny. And then he says, then also he points out, and then another thing he says is, and then the effect of a typical list summary. The author says many different things about his subject. First he says, then he makes the point that, in addition he says, and then he writes, also he shows that, and then he says, it may be boring list summaries like this that gives summaries in general a bad name and even prompts some instructors to discourage their students from summarizing at all. In conclusion, writing a good summary means not just representing an author's view accurately, but also doing so in a way that fits your own composition's larger agenda or purpose. On the one hand, it means playing Peter Elbow's believing game, believing that you believe what they believe, and doing justice to the source. If the summary ignores or misrepresents the source, its bias and unfairness will show. On the other hand, even as it does justice to the source, a summary has to have a slant, a spin, a focus, right? That prepares the way for your own claims. Once a summary enters your text, you should think of it as joint property, reflecting both the source and you are summarizing and your own views. This is true also for evidence that you're using that support that you agree with. Okay. We don't have to talk about summarizing satirically, but here are some templates for introducing summaries and quotations. She advocates, they celebrate the fact that blank, he admits. Okay, so there are lots of words that you could use. And we can, when you're introducing other people's views. Here in this article, sometimes she doesn't even mention the author. She just lists facts. But if you're talking about someone's view that you're either disagreeing with or that supports your views, you could introduce it with states or says, or use more advanced words like proposed, theorized, espoused, etc. So verbs for making a claim are here. Here are some that you could use, like argue, assert, believe, claim, emphasize, insist, observe, remind us, report. So if you don't want to say states, these are some, or claim, you can use these other helpful verbs. Here are some verbs instead of saying agrees, right? He acknowledges, he admires, he endorses, extols, praises. But the more you read, the more you'll see these, and the more you'll be able to use them in your own writing without even thinking about it, without having to go flip to a thesaurus or memorize this list. Okay, and here are some more that you can look at on your own. What I want you to do is do this exercise, which is actually pretty fun because I really like this essay. Oh, I'm sorry, not this exercise. We're going to do exercise number 2. Okay, first you're going to read this article, Don't Blame the Eater, about fast food and obesity by David Zinczenko. Then you're going to write 2 different summaries of his article. Write the first one for an essay arguing that, contrary to what Zinczenko claims, so you're disagreeing with him, there are inexpensive and convenient alternatives to fast food restaurants. So you're not going to develop this claim, you're only going to write the summary before this claim occurs, right? And you're going to write the summary in a way that will transition easily into your own claim. Okay, so the first one is about saying that there are inexpensive and convenient alternatives to fast food restaurants. And then your second paragraph should be for an essay that questions whether being overweight is a genuine medical problem rather than a problem of cultural stereotypes. So Zinczenko has written this article, and you are going to write 2 different summaries of it. One of it is for the purpose of writing this first essay, and the second one is for the purpose of writing the second essay. Okay? Then you're going to compare your 2 summaries, and they should be a little bit different, right? So this one should be more focusing on inexpensive and convenient alternatives to fast food restaurants, to this claim that he makes that they're not inexpensive and convenient alternatives to fast food restaurants, right? And this one will probably focus more on the claim that that being overweight is a genuine medical problem. Okay, so you should summarize it in the way that you could transition to an essay about the medical problem of obesity. Okay, so first what you're going to do is read this, and then you're going to summarize it, including different information and different parts of the article based on what the topic of the essay is. So basically you're going to come up with 2 different summaries, and I want you to bring them to class, and we'll look at them in class. And that's all for this video, and we'll read the last chapter at another time. Have a wonderful day.